Sierra's silhouette was framed by amber light coming through the cafe window when I first spotted her on a clear fall morning. Her posture was confident, and her eyes were full of ambition. When we looked at one another, I felt a peculiar pull that was a combination of appreciation and want. I realized at that point that I wanted more than a casual conversation over coffee. Ambitions for one's career and the minor setbacks that influence one's course. At the time, I had no idea how complicated her grin was. A few weeks later, Sierra asked me to join her for supper. The invitation seemed really tender, but it was also a little vulnerable as I entered my parents' home. Rich aromas of southern cooking filled the air as Sierra's mother met them at the front door. Laughter reverberated down the hallway. Sierra's father nodded respectfully at me, her eyes bright and curious. Who was this man occupying space in their daughter's life later? Sierra? Was the silent inquiry in their eyes. "There's someone important you haven't met," she remarked softly, as she drew me aside in a quiet hallway corner. A little girl with curly hair led me through a set of French doors into a tiny bedroom, raising my heart, and sparkling eyes peered above a stack of plush animals. Sierra mumbled her name, Hi, and was quiet, inquisitive, and careful. She was 4 years old and the daughter of a man named Jalen, who made my heart tighten, had disappeared when Sierra's confessions spilt into the warm air after love went sour. She had reared him. Grandparents even since that painful breakdown. I can still clearly recall the day I understood that decision was more important than situation. When I observed Sierra's hesitating determination and Haley's unsure expression, I didn't see any difficulty, but a demonstration of the survival and resiliency developed via suffering and loss. After Sierra searched my face, I smiled and put a kind hand on Haley's shoulder. I won't just love you, I'll step up for Hi too," I said in a calm voice. Loyalty was a decision, and it was that decision that established my place at their table. Love was a promise. In the days that followed, I engaged myself in courses about parenting and discovered the little care rituals like making pancakes, wrapping blankets around drowsy shoulders, listening to him whisper creatively, and enjoying the perfect amount of syrup tales in fragmented lines. Every moment forged a heart of trust. "Heartily," Sierra observed from the doorway, occasionally grinning and other times biting her lip, as though still assessing my sincerity, but persisted on running to my side each morning to stretch up to put their little arms around my waist and give me a hug through laughter. And as we played board games, Haley's excited giggles filled our flat, and we created a new rhythm. I applauded her triumphant bows as she rolled the dice and took the first round at the preschool performance, with the camera ready to record each. When her sleep was disturbed by nightmares, I slept next to her and hummed lullabies till she breathed, balanced out. I knelt down and used soft fingertips to wipe tears from each scraped knee and whispered tales of kindness and bravery to make her smile again. Of course, there were evenings when doubt began to creep in as I questioned whether I was sufficient and whether my professed commitment could match the intense link she shared with Sierra. Her mother had silent wounds from loss and abandonment, anxiety. Learned to mimic her strength with consistent support by speaking in kind reassurances. I promised that if Hi ever doubted my dedication, my prior shortcomings, or my ability to defend her daughter, I would remain steadfast and not take my place at their table for granted. One evening, as Sierra's head fell between us, her eyelids dropping as we sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. Her fingers intertwined with mine against my shoulder in that silent space, I became aware of the seriousness of my decision. To love someone whose journey started because they carried a piece of another life. Sierra snuggled into me and sighed softly before I came. "Thank you," she said. For selecting, I kissed her forehead and breathed in the night air, my determination growing stronger. Love demands more than love. It requires bravery to assert one's place in another's world and the humility to respect their history. The gift they gave me with their trust is worth any sacrifice I can think of. I quietly swore to defend her laughter, protect her dreams, and earn my seat as I tucked her into bed that night. Each day, I saw our fresh start, molded by her serene expression, chosen love, steadfast dedication, and the immense strength of faith in our abilities build together. I carried my commitment like a shield after that night. Promise. Every hardship would test our family's cohesiveness, and every happiness would demonstrate its worth. I realized that securing my position required constant effort, steadfast attendance, and the commitment to be my heart grew as Sierra and I stood at the altar, and Father High deserved it. Purposefully, our guests hushed breaths, and the gentle clink of silver bells seemed to reverberate a promise in the air. As we exchanged vows, I was committing to a family that was already in motion, not just marriage. Looked at Harry sitting between her grandparents in the first row, holding a little bouquet that was almost as large as she was. I realized then that I couldn't only be Sierra's partner, I had to be Haye's father. I made the decision to invite Sierra, and I sat in the kitchen a week after the wedding, letting her completely inside our house, our life, and my heart. She handed me a folded note that said, "They've agreed," as the sunshine on the table sliced through the morning mist. My pulse accelerated as I shivered as my parents handed over the guardianship documents, revealed the legal arrangements on the crisp paper, and my name was formally listed. I would move in with us. As Sierra's guardian, I felt a wave of humility and excitement as we revealed that afternoon. Her shy joy replaced her initial amazement. She nodded so sincerely that I feared her head may fall off. I caressed her locks and chuckled as she inquired, "Will I get my own room?" "Every corner of this house is yours." I threw myself into fatherhood like I was polishing it on the weekends. I used art I had recently discovered to turn our living room into a pirate ship by commandeering a sofa. I discovered which bedtime stories helped her cuddle the most, and I bought pillows for sails and boxes for treasure chests, which soothed her restless eyes with lullabies. After she scraped her leg on the sidewalk outside our school, without hesitation, I knelt next to her and began wiping away her tears while making silly expressions on her bandage to make her laugh. The sincerity of the activity was not for show. Rather, I felt that the little unwavering act showed love. Everyday routines I set up my work schedule when High started first grade. As other children passed by, I gripped the steering wheel to pick her up from the bus stop until I noticed her pink rucksack bobbing in my direction. Her radiant, unguarded smile took away all of my worries. She threw herself into my arms to test my weight, as if I were carrying the weight of the coding problems and meetings from that day. I carried her inside, placed her luggage by the entrance, and listened quietly while she spoke, calculating the extent of my commitment. I replied to her exuberant and joyful movements as she recalled her fun escapades, with tales from my own early years, creating connections between two cultures she could not have otherwise encountered. 2 years later, when I first held my daughter Amani, who had arrived in a flurry of white blankets and baby coos, I felt in close connection, a delicate equilibrium developing between two sisters, one of whom was born of I created a dual college because my blood was the other born of choice, and I promised at the time that neither child would ever suspect favoritism. Funds in one form's name, with each formee paying an equal amount. Every month, whenever I deposited a check or paid a bill, I saw 2 parallel lines of savings extending. I prayed for good futures. And in my quiet moments, I thought of graduation caps. As siblings, Hallie and the 2 daughters stand side by side, rising and honoring the foundation we made together. Damani developed together, sometimes in concord and other times in rivalry, cheered when Haley scored her first goal one afternoon while coaching her football team. The following weekend, I provided guidance, As I watched Amani's painting class laugh together, I was impressed by her focus as she applied violet to the canvas. I witnessed moments of bedtime gossip and laughter in the corridor as they planned their make-believe kingdoms. Tension 2. Arguments about bedtime stories and squabbles about toys, but I upheld empathy and justice in every conflict. I told them that love never dies, and that being an older sister meant guarding, advising, and occasionally sharing your favorite doll with a person who admired you. In the mornings, I was up before the sun came up getting ready for pancakes for 2 young customers. I threw the flapjacks into the air and managed to catch them, ensuring they fell perfectly. Golden circles. Amani and Hai sat next to one another, laughing and exchanging syrup. Sierra joined us after spilling blueberries, putting her arms around my shoulders as breakfast conversation filled the room, and we sang along to cheerful music on the way to school. Imani hums as Hai belts out the words to the newest pop songs. Own made-up tunes, I became aware that the home I had previously lived with 2 people now hummed with the happy cacophony of 4, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Of course, there were times when I stumbled along the way. Concerned that Amani would feel eclipsed by her older sister's presence, or that Hai could be resentful of the new infant formed a relationship with Sierra, I also wondered if I was going too far in claiming to be Haley's father, but every time doubt started to creep in, I reminded myself that love could be selected, raised, and demonstrated with constant attention. At night, when Haye turned to me for solace, I whispered, "You're my daughter." As Amani reached for my hand in a crowd, I gave her a gentle squeeze to confirm that she belonged just as much as anyone in our family book photos that documented significant events. Amani's first Smile Beach visits, when the 2 girls constructed sandcastles side by side, and Haley's first day of school. Every picture told a tale of an afternoon spent creating memories, cooking meals, going to bed, telling stories, dancing. Spontaneously, etc. gatherings in the living room. Every story confirmed the reality I had come to understand. Fatherhood was more than just biology. As I stand at the threshold, it was a choice of devotion and unwavering presence. I understand that tonight's efforts to soothe Amani as she describes her school day, I never would have imagined that the seat I earned would be as secure as Sierra's and Haley's confidence. Amani's unwavering love and acceptance have created a tapestry that is more resilient than being a father wasn't a burden. Rather, it was the fulfillment of all the promises I made, every sacrifice I accepted, and every instance in which I was really present. Totally committed, I discovered my genuine calling in this mosaic of sacred tasks and chosen bonds. Legacy of the family we created together when I was a teenager, and the father I promised to be years later. I saw the first slight change in her behavior. The gleam in her eyes became wary of the easy, more subdued laughing. One Saturday morning, I discovered her hanging around the kitchen table after her toast, had I eased onto the chair across from her, my icy fingers browsing through her phone as if seeking comfort in its glow. Cleared my throat and inquired about my well-being. She gave me a strained glance and remarked, "Jalen texted me last night. I didn't realize he had contacted Sierra, and I had promised that as long as since Hai had a secure home where her biological father's meddling could wait. He was once again a phantom from I questioned Sierra about why she hadn't told me about Jalen's past as she entered the kitchen. Messages. She bit her lip and acknowledged that I believed granting her contact was the proper thing to do. He's still her. Her remark struck a deeper chord than I had anticipated. So I reminded her that I was the one who had been her father every day since she was 4. He tucked her in, wiped away her sorrows, and celebrated her victories. Sierra's stillness before bed was an implicit admission that I will always be the understudy in Haley's story. Dad Harley went to her room that afternoon, creating a hole in the home that reverberated more loudly than any disagreement. Over the course of the following weeks, she grew more distant and, like a fortress, shut the door to her bedroom. She once allowed me to braid her hair before school, but her answers to my friendly questions shrank to single words. Abruptly yanked away, mumbling that she would rather handle it herself. The candid photos that line our hallway of smiling people and beach vacations started to seem like remnants of a different era. So I would stop at each frame and examine the pictures and evoke the assurance that my love had been unwavering. But our home felt more silent. When I knocked on her house one evening and offered her 2 cups of cocoa, she cracked them open and glanced at me. "Why do you care so much?" She questioned me in a voice I learnt to swallow, and I forced myself to remain calm. "Because I love," she said. She shook her head and took a step back, shutting the door with a, "You high because I want to be part of your life." Cocoa was warming my palms as I stood in the hallway with a faint click, feeling the sting of rejection for the first time. I tried other things after realizing that love, even when freely given, may be rejected. In the hopes that the tactile concentration would help us overcome the distance, I enrolled us in a pottery class as a father-daughter pair. I wrote supportive notes in her backpack, complimented her on her most recent school art creation, and asked her to invite a buddy over so I could demonstrate that our friendship wasn't competitive. Every time I tried, she responded with a courteous nod or turr. With gratitude but no real emotion, I started to realize that Hallie was more than just challenging limits. She was claiming her independence and summoning her biological father's spirit to contest my position in her life. Later that afternoon, I learned the truth. And Sierra and I organized a family portrait, and I hired a local photographer and chose a location near the lake in an effort to document our blended family in a moment of solidarity. On the day I came, I purchased matching clothing for all of us at golden hour, early to ease my anxiety. When she eventually came out, she was dressed in her own clothing, a t-shirt and a torn denim jacket. Wearing a band emblem, she hardly paid attention to me, and when I pointed out the mismatched color scheme, Sierra's uneasy shifting caused my throat to tighten, and she shrugged and said, "I'm not your sidekick." A contrite look, but remained silent to stop the photographer from calling us together, and we stood in a loose sitting beneath the oak trees. Haley's body was rigid, her eyes focused on a far-off object, and I took Sierra's hand. The photographer said, "All right," after the camera made 2 clicks, hoping that a flicker of warmth would light up the frame. I went to High and started narrating the story, saying, "Let's try a candid talk to each other about your favorite summer memory." When she first learnt to ride a bike, her smile was so big that she seemed unstoppable. But the photographer shuddered, as though unsure, and simply rolled her eyes, saying, "That was fun until it wasn't." I tried again, gently. "Recall that on your first fun run, I carried you across the finish line." Hilly's response was a Sierra's face turned pale as I forced a laugh to keep the situation from getting out of hand. Cold whisper. That's what daddies do when they're hired to. However, after I realized how deeply her comments struck, the harm was already done. Reminder that the biological connection she desired was always more important to her than my function, which was conditional. That evening as I lay awake, I imagined Jalin stepping back into her, and the customary fear did not twist in my chest. As if manipulating a puppet, I recalled my promise to earn my seat, but this demonstrated that no amount of dedication could nullify the attraction of blood links. By the next morning, I was determined to face the ghost head. When I invited Hallie to meet me in the backyard, she grudgingly accepted. With a dejected expression, I escorted her to the wooden seat beneath the willow tree and sat next to her for a while. We didn't say anything until I finally remarked, "I know Jalin reached out and that scares me." I took a moment to look into her eyes, but I wanted to let you know that I'm not here to take his place. Rather, I'm here because I choose to every day. She looked away with tears in her eyes and said nothing but herself. I put an arm about her while her shoulders shook and waited for the willow leaves to rustle overhead like tentative applause. I understood in that delicate silence that recovery would not happen quickly. Father and daughter are not titles bestowed by marriage documents alone. They are created with mutual respect, acknowledgement, and hardships. Her father's ghost would persist, but I made the decision to respect her need for connection while keeping my own space. I hugged her while we sat together. The wind shifted and leaned her, allowing my love to permeate into her defenses, head against my shoulder. It seemed like the first time, yet it was only a modest gesture, an opening rather than a resolve. In that timid embrace, I witnessed the beginning of our new chapter, one in which ghosts appear in the picture. Could contribute to the fabric instead of destroying our family, and even if the future was still unclear, I recall the precise moment I realized that I would keep watching over my seat, ready to earn it again and again. I had woken up before dawn on the morning of Haley's 17th birthday, and something had changed between us forever. I had spent the entire week researching the ideal present, something useful but still useful, with a sense of anticipation throbbing through me like an electric current. Significant as a representation of self-reliance and accountability. When I saw the stylish, I knew it was suitable when the silver Toyota Corolla was offered at a price I could afford without compromising our savings plan. I saw the excitement of her first solo drive, her eyes enlarging, her smile splitting her face. I imagined us drifting down winding roads as she called me on school mornings to let me know she made it safely. Her voice was vibrant. I parked the car in the driveway's curves that morning, and we laughed as we drove down the country roads. I put the keys in a velvet line box and attached a huge burgundy ribbon to the antenna so they would sparkle under the garage light. As the sun rose, Sierra and I stood back on the hood, each of us holding a coffee cup, and I swallowed my apprehensive excitement. Sierra nodded, pressing a stray hair against the lump in my throat, and I remarked in a proud voice, "She's going to love it." She acknowledged that the hair behind her ear was exquisite, yet her eyes carried an unspoken warning. I couldn't understand. High's bedroom door creaking when she eventually showed up at the top of the driveway. She wore leggings and an oversized hoodie, and her hair made my chest tighten. I called her name when she was still rubbing sleep from her eyes and was pushed into a messy bun. She blinked at me with a look of bewilderment when she noticed me, hoping to gently entice her outside. "Happy birthday," I replied, extending the key box to the automobile. Her eyes darted to the automobile, then back to me. The pause between us was like a canyon, and I waited for the shout, the rush of joy I had earned over years of devotion. But instead she glanced at me with an unfathomable face. She finally placed the package on the hood and declared without a smile, "It's a Corolla." I opened my mouth to say, "No thanks." The words came like stones. Safety ratings, insurance, costs and dependability, but her hand sliced through the air. "Where's the Audi?" she insisted, her voice so muffled by fury or hurt that I couldn't tell which was which. Throat shut. "An Audi," I said again, my tone laced with incredulity, and she raised an eyebrow. Wrinkled. "The one Jalen assured me. The E. One father who consistently receives his daughters," she said, "Dad," as if to see if it still belonged to me, Sierra. Walked to stand next to me and put a hand on my arm. "You know why, Harry, sweetie." Spun around on her mother's reasons, her ironic voice echoing. "You believe I'm not sure why you believe that I lack practical knowledge. Perhaps you're frugal, but I'm not." Her remarks were more powerful than any I thought my ears might sing from the physical hit, but I felt the color drain from my cheeks. Echoes. I saw Sierra open her mouth to object, but then shut it again. I took a deep breath tightening and unclenching my fists until my nails stung to protect myself. Into my palms, anger erupted at Sierra's silent response as much as the rejection. Collusion. My spouse, who had previously informed me that I deserved my seat. Now observed, I noticed Haley's folded arms, her tight mouth line, and the way her eyes sparkled when her daughter made fun of my devotion. I recalled the evenings I spent up late creating a budget for her education fund, with a mixture of entitlement and disappointment. The innumerable skinned knees and bedtime tales during the afternoons while I coached her football team seemed to "let's go inside," I said, disappearing in that instant like chalk on a blackboard, stated in a calm, quiet voice. Even though I could feel Sierra hesitating, but after wrapping an arm around my waist, Hai hurried up the front after taking a quick look at the keys where she had set them. I turned to face Sierra and said, "Thank you for that," in a whisper. Sierra's face crumbled with the bitterness that covered every syllable. "I'm sorry," she said. I closed my eyes, hoping that my disappointment would not turn to rage, but you were mistaken. I put down my coffee and combed my hair since the house felt empty. The kitchen clock was ticking away loudly every second. Sierra hovered next to me, her eyes beseeching. "Can we talk about this?" As a reminder of the growing distance between us. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, shaking my head and moving away. "I gave her my best," she spat on it, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I apologize," she murmured again in a quiet voice. But when deeds spoke louder than words, apologies felt hollow. In the days that followed, I observed Haley's chili. I heard her friends snickering as they made fun of the cheap stepdad, and I witnessed their apathy turn into blatant rejection. Sierra and I argued in private while she told the Corolla story, each time adding to my embarrassment. She defended her daughter in the nights, and I defended my sadness. We kept arguing till one afternoon. As I passed the dealership where I purchased the car, quiet descended around us like a thick veil. With my heart racing, I sat in the driver's seat of a dazzling red Audi A3 that was shining beneath floodlights, mocking me. I saw trading the leather steering wheel that my own automobile fingertips were grazing. Corolla, for that Audi. Could I afford it if I tried to regain my dignity? The idea was flimsy, and I understood that no matter how lavish, presents couldn't ensure respect or affection, but they could only show one's priorities. That evening, I dumped my money on the kitchen counter to support my college education. Sierra watched as I laid out our financial goals, and I couldn't stop pouring out insurance bills, car keys, and statements. "Become a person who views me as an ATM," I replied in a calm yet determined tone, and her face. She murmured, "What are you saying, pal?" I looked her in the eyes and responded, "I'm saying that love is not a transaction. It requires respect, commitment, and attention. And when those are lacking, and no amount of common sense will fill the void." In the weeks that followed, I retreated and ceased. I volunteered at her football matches, avoided giving her unexpected presents, and allowed her to grow up without my help. Towering presence, Sierra and I reconstructed little bridges, ate together, and had peaceful conversations. I concentrated on Amani and my work after the girls went to sleep, channeling love where it happened organically. Hai stayed far away, but I no longer felt invisible. Freed from the weight of unfulfilled love, I saw her in the classroom a few months later. She looked straight ahead with her forehead as she slid uncomfortably into the parking lot, into the Corolla. From a distance, I saw the wrinkled key trembling in her palm, and my heart began to soften a little. Perhaps she would learn to appreciate the gift I had given her, or perhaps she had created her own entitlement path. In any case, I realized that earning love required a higher level of mutual respect and couldn't be quantified in money or pragmatism. No bow on a car could guarantee my seat at their table till she valued me more than my money. The house seemed different. the morning following Haley's birthday, when there was a lot of activity and laughing around, there was now an uncomfortable silence, like if the walls were holding their breath, while I rinsed my coffee mug at the sink. Sierra had left for an early meeting, and Amani was in the hot water, scorching my hands but not my heart. Hari and I were the only ones awake in the quiet space of our living room. I recalled an instance in which she bounded down the stairs with inquiries after leaping from her bedroom and chatting about dreams. And joy today. I looked at her, and even her footsteps sounded like a grudging admission that she was still living. Under our roof, the front door, half expecting her to disappear silently, and I made the decision that I wouldn't be the one to pursue her. Tried numerous times to show my love for you by bridging the gap between us with gifts, gestures, and constant attention. However, every gesture was greeted with contempt or disdain. It was evident that each time I approached, instead of obstructing her path, she retreated farther, choosing alone over communication and quiet over recollections. I decided to back off when others asked me questions or made demands. I would keep silent and let the emptiness speak for itself. Later that I heard the front door click open in the afternoon, and as I looked up from my laptop, I saw Ha standing. In the foyer, her eyes focused on her rucksack was thrown carelessly over one shoulder as she walked across the flooring. I kept my hands folded on the coffee table and closed my laptop, maintaining my posture. But she didn't encounter my eyes as she passed by, hardly acknowledging that I hadn't called out to her. The silence between us felt, when dinner time arrived, I set the plates on the table, each heart pounding in a separate rhythm as heavy as any dispute. Howie didn't show up at the table for Amani and me, so Imani's little voice worriedly said, "Is Hai coming?" "She's busy today," Amani said, with a nice smile and a delicate shrug to prevent my kid from sensing the stress. Sighed but nodded, and we started eating. The sound of forks hitting the table as we shared our food and Amani's rambling brought back memories of the more basic pleasures I still enjoyed. Couldn't ignore the vacant chair in front of me, which was an unsaid reminder of the cost of moving away that night. Imani fell. Her head resting on my chest, she fell asleep in my arms while I read her a story. After tucking her down, I went back to the living room and saw a partially texted message from Sierra on my phone. "What do you do?" I inhaled deeply and typed back, "We wait." It was the most difficult thing I had done in a long time. Watched to see if absence could cause introspection, so I put the phone down and focused on myself, remembering every time I had battled for Haley's love, coaching her squad, and having late-night conversations and surprise gifts. Numerous bedtime hugs and legal documents hadn't been sufficient. Maybe now allowing Haley's room remained sealed for a few days while she lived in a subdued routine, feeling that the blank would teach her what she had drove away. When I got home from work, the only sound coming from her car was the hum of the refrigerator Sierra, and I looked at one other wearily across the dinner table, neither of us saying anything but silently supporting one another. We discovered comfort and little rituals like washing dishes together while making fun of Amani for the toothpaste streak she wouldn't brush. On the back porch, swapping half-empty coffee mugs, I came to the realization that taking a step back didn't imply desertion. Rather, it meant maintaining my honor and safeguarding the relationships that were still important. One night, when I heard the distinctive click of the front door, I pushed my hair back and watered the plants on the porch. Red-rimmed eyes, she stopped at the entrance, gripping the straps of her rucksack, and gazed out at the garden where I stood. Putting the watering can down slowly, I avoided going near her and instead let the aroma of jasmine wafting about her like an invitation. The night air filled the gap between us. She reluctantly, gently replied, "Did you know that your dad only comes around when he wants something?" The word hurt, but I held my posture, calmly looking into her eyes. "I'm not your biological father," I stated. "I never claimed to be. But I made the decision to be here for you every day," she said, swallowing her eyes. With a spark of rage and something more profound, hurt possibly, or remorse. "Or you." I nodded in appreciation for her candor as she whispered, "That doesn't mean I choose you back," I responded, "and that's a choice only you can make." Rather than backing down, she moved closer as if attracted by the honesty in my eyes. "But I'm not sure." She acknowledged that her voice cracked, and now that I've studied, everything is different. Her profile showing how she had developed into a young lady with tense lines surrounding her mouth and a furrowed forehead as she tried to put into words how proud I was of the girl I had cradled as a toddler. But I also felt sad for her. "We can take it gradually," I said, "for the person she was becoming. No pressure, no expectations." She nodded, and I noticed a shiver of relief flash across her face for the first time in weeks. In the days that followed, Hai started to come out of her shell. She kept her backpack by her door, and I could hear that the coffee machine restarted one evening, and she was washing dishes when I passed by the kitchen. She didn't object when I put a towel in her hands and we worked side by side without talking, but the quiet wasn't painful anymore. Friendly, a place where words may return when we were ready, and I fulfilled my pledges to remain and stand back. Silent, giving her the opportunity to approach on her own terms, and she did. Gradually, she started to share bits and pieces of her day, an annoying test result, a humorous remark from a friend, and I listened to a brief excerpt of a song she enjoyed without interjecting, giving her quick nods or questions to help guide the conversation. As we spoke, I saw that her room door was left open, and more frequently, pictures would resurface on the walls. I also saw her driving the Corolla to football practice with renewed resolve, then carefully park it in the driveway. As we made our way to the bus station that afternoon, Hai put her hand in mine, and I gazed down at her thin fingers interlacing with mine and experienced a silent victory. No, the seat at her table wasn't given to me without merit, had only needed little distance and deference as a reminder that love once taken for granted needs to be treasured in a fresh way. And I could tell she had not only welcomed me back into her life, but also made the decision to accept me again on her own terms. Christmas came with dazzling promise, and I awoke before the sun came up, trying to catch the silence in the home. Turned the lawn glittering with frost outside and smelt faintly of pine inside. Sierra had decorated our kitchen the night before Amani's breath entered, and cinnamon wafted from there. Soft snores next to me, and I was overwhelmed with thankfulness for our small family's warmth, until I realized that the idea of returning home from college later that day made me queasy. By midday, the house was illuminated. Garlands hanging above entrances, wounded around the banister, and a table covered in white linen displayed plates of mashed potatoes, platters of roasted turkey and gammon, and images of Sierra effusive, spiced cider. As I completed wrapping Amani's last-minute gift, a sketchbook wrapped in leather, festive enthusiasm worried over the details. I entered the living room and set a tiny box with symbols of affection for both girls at each spot. When the car drew into the driveway, I felt my heart race. She came out wearing a wool coat, her hair pulled back, her eyes guarded, and she grinned. When Imani's eyes met mine, I noticed something unreadable, a detached annoyance, or maybe out of resentment. I gulped and nodded to her. She gave me a brusque "Merry Christmas" before moving towards the mantel. Where stockings hung side by side, Imani talked about her college classes and new things as dinner started with laughs. Sierra, one of my pals, raised her glass in a sincere toast, thanking everyone for being together. I heard the determined to enjoy the moment, the clinking of cutlery and the buzz of discussion, but the peace broke when, with a sly smile, Liza, who was seated at the head of the table, said, "Hallie, aren't you thankful to have such a giving father?" The room froze, and I could feel Sierra tensing up next to me. "Hello, Drew." Her voice cut as she took a steady breath and fixed me with her steely, bright eyes. "Some people aren't even worth calling Dad," she muttered. Like a razor, I watched her words cut across stunned faces as they passed through the room. The air shuddered at Sierra's gasp, Imani's wide eyes, and Aunt Liza's flushed cheeks. As if unsure whether to burn, candles flickered while plates remained motionless halfway to mouths. A tremor raced through me, but I made myself feel calm, so I remained there and grinned subtly, refusing to. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Hari," I answered in a calm voice. I chose that word to give her the response she wanted, because that's how I feel. Imani's hand touched mine as Sierra's shoulders slumped as if she had lost a fight. I placed my serviette on the table, squeezed it softly underneath, and took a step back to let the silence grow. Without any word, I turned and left the table. My coat's gentle touch sounded like a farewell as I went through the gold and crimson decorated tree in the living room. Its light sparkling blindly as I walked, carried me out the rear door and around to the garage, stopping at my car's hood, where the paint reflected the light. Christmas lights and buried my forehead against the cool metal that I had sacrificed conveniences for years of devotion to, and repeatedly extended my heart, only to be rejected the one time I asked for recognition. After what seemed like an eternity but was yet far too short, I brought a big box back to the kitchen, and Sierra glanced up. She muttered, "Where are you going?" with tears in her eyes, and I steadfastly looked into her eyes. She reached for me, but I simply answered, "I'm done," and I folded the box towards her, saying, "Everything I bought, is included her birthday presents, college fund deeds, and mementos of my Sierra's face flooded with dread as I made my love tangible." I regret going outside once more, this time to the garage, where I placed the box on the ground next to the Corolla and started the engine. Off and left the door open while I listened to Sierra's footsteps trail behind me. As I ascended to the top of the car's hood, she came up with me. "Please," she begged, her voice shaking, "don't do this." I stared at with her suffering and determination in my eyes. I said, "I can't stay where I'm not wanted," Sierra cried as she reached out and replied, "Not today, not ever again if this is how she sees me." However, I silently added, "I love you and I love you," and held out a hand. Love isn't a silent contract, it's acquired daily, and I slid off that lesson tonight. The hood shut the box lid, and I went back inside, avoiding the dining room where the family was sitting motionless. Instead, I went upstairs, packed a little bag, and left it in startled stillness. Sierra discovered me standing by the front door, paused between us, and remained silent. The following morning, before the sun came up, I sneaked out with Imani and held her in the car, feeling her tiny body. "Where are we going?" I shudder. She inquired in a drowsy voice, so I combed her, hair back, and stated I needed a place to remember the value of my life, but I wasn't sure where that would be. Imani closed her eyes and nodded, and as we drove away, I sensed the love. Pain of loss and the flimsy notion that perhaps by taking me out of the situation, I could help them understand the price of I didn't sleep that night after the laughter subsided, and the man who provided them with everything was dismissed. I sneaked out of the bedroom and sat at my desk under the gentle glow of my laptop after the last of the candles went out. I gazed at the screen for a while as I looked at the bright folders of bills, statements, and pictures. For a long time, I was amazed at how simple years of dedication might be, discarded with a few harsh comments. As I summoned, my finger lingered on the trackpad. The numbers on Haley's Education Fund's internet portal flashed back at me like lights on a balance screen. Of $110,000, the result of my consistent donations since the day she turned 7, felt as though every deposit, birthday, Christmas, and bonus check were compressed into that amount. And I came to the realization, without hesitation, I navigated that investment, which had become into a symbol of unjustified entitlement rather than gratitude. I watched the confirmation screen flicker as the transfer mechanism chose Amani's fund as the destination. All $110,000 I gave up for Haley's future. Now that Amani's dreams were safe, I shut the laptop, heaved my chest, and stood. The house was silent. I walked down the hall and into the garage, where boxes were stored, the walls still colored with the echo of holiday strain. Those suitcases included every present I had ever given to Hai, including jewelry and electronics that she never worn. She had either destroyed or disregarded the pictures I had taken of her science fair and first day of kindergarten. Victory, I put them all in a big plastic container and sealed it with a sense of closure that made me shudder. Sierra blinked at the scene of uncertainty as she woke up in the morning to see me loading the bin into the back of our SUV. Her features are lined with, "What are you doing?" I looked into her eyes as she said, her voice heavy with concern and fatigue. "I'm returning something she never valued," I replied quietly, not flinching. It's time she realized the price of her disdain. I gave her every sign of my affection, but she regarded it as a sale. She briefly extended her hand as if to stop me as her eyes filled with sorrow, but I carefully took it away and closed the hatch with the clunk resounding like a verdict. Later that day, I blocked Hai on all social media, email, and phone platforms. Media no messages, calls, or digital traces that could reveal my location. It wasn't resentment that drove, but a sharp realization that I would no longer play a part she made fun of. As I stood in the deserted house, I sensed a changing tide. The scent of the Christmas tree's pine blended with the summer heat beneath my feet. I shut the door to my office and apologized silently to the ghost of our memories while floating through an open window. The triumphant applause at school, the goodnight stories told in the warm lamplight, and the laughter that once filled these halls' recital. It all boiled up into a dull pain below my ribs, and when Sierra asked how I was feeling, I just replied. My words lingered in the air like frost on a window pane, icy and lovely. Don't ever let her call me Dad again. And unchangeable. She turned her head away, unwilling or unable to face the finality in my eyes, as I carried the present bin to the garage and passed her into the sunlit living room. Every step felt like a final one. And a beginning. I set up the bin, marking the end of naive forgiveness and the start of heart protection. Next to the Corolla, her birthday vehicle, the burgundy ribbon has faded and its paint has become dull. By resentful. As I sat on my truck's hood that afternoon and observed how the world went on without me, I considered the times I would never be able to regain her college, where her laughter was once bright and uninhibited, but is now chilly and distant. Graduation, a father-daughter dance, and the soft "I love you" whisper at the end of the day made me feel both sad and deeply feeling of tranquility I had given unconditionally for too long in order to find my love. Lampooned in the silent aftermath, I realized that she did not estimate my value, but by the love I freely gave to those who appreciated it, and as the sun sank more in the sky, I painted I knew I was no longer broken after discovering the driveway gold. I was only deciding where to put my heart's money. A seat regained by self-respect and eyes wide open. In the weeks following my withdrawal, rumors of Haley's, as she murmured updates to his wife Shay, Jalen Sierra's voice echoed through the hallways of their new life. The small flat, with its possessions crammed into one corner and the resentment of a teenager forced into its rituals, every piece of the Audi's unfulfilled promises hit me like a stone in my chest, but the most devastating blow came, I thought. I'd be content here, but when I heard Haley's voice shake during a phone call in the living room, it's just I didn't feel victorious. Only a sadness that went deeper than any disagreement. That day, as the autumn sun slanted across the boards, I sat on the porch as I used my fingertips to trace grain patterns as memories flashed back to her. Laughter when she initially contacted me. Dad. The quiet trust as she drifted to our beach excursions, the pride in her gaze sleeping in my arms. I came to understand that being consistent at her darkest moments was more important than simply providing for her. I had forced clarity by removing myself, but I was afraid the lesson would come at too high a price. Sierra put a kind hand on my shoulder and said, "She misses you," when she discovered me there. I nodded quietly, the dream of simple belonging, settling like nightfall, had vanished, leaving behind the reality that love isn't a given. It must be earned and re-earned. I took a breath of fresh air and decided that if Hai came back, she'd locate a father who was willing to take her back, but only when she has demonstrated that she values the morning Sierra and Amani came up to me together. A heavy ache settled in my chest from the seat she had so nonchalantly eliminated. They discovered me looking through old photo albums in the study. Amani's eyes were wide with hope, and Sierra was torn. Dad Imani's voice trembled as he apologized. "Can you come back?" I laid putting the record down. I took a deep breath. The question seemed like a hammer threatening to bring down the walls As Sierra reached for my hand, I could feel the weight of her silent request. I looked at Amani's sincere expression, and then at Sierra's soft nod. And I realized that she was forgiving her daughter. Needed to be clear instead of impulsive. "The door is open," I said, carefully selecting. I paused, drawing a line in the grain of each syllable. "She's welcome to return home." The desk, but she burned the seat at my table, which is no longer there. They absorbed my meaning, and I wanted them. To see that reconciliation required more than just forgiveness, and that forgiveness was not the same as erasing the past. Regret. Weeks later, she stood at the doorway, her thin figure carved with the years of separation, and her voice faltered. I observed the hesitant entreaty in her eyes as she replied, "I made a mistake." Her eyes, which had previously glowed, with remorse now tainted my entitlement. I pointed to the living room and said, "You can stay, but not as my daughter." The words fell like the last brushstroke of a painter, leaving her shoulders permanently damaged. With a soft click that reverberated throughout the home, she slouched and shut the door behind her. In the days that followed, Hai discovered her own area, placing a single picture of us on her dresser, unpacking the box I had left in the garage, and she didn't call me Dad. Instead, she settled onto a corner of the dining table, asked if I still cared after giving me a cautious nod and lingering looks, so I gave a courteous. She talked about college applications and resisted the temptation to micromanage during the brunch conversation. She needed assistance with auto insurance, so I helped her fill out the documents while maintaining a stern but neutral tone of encouragement. Slowly, as if anticipating my disappearance once more, I saw her draw back with every act of compassion. As she stayed with me, I had a glimmer of optimism that maybe one day she would actually deserve her position. Only forgiveness, but the ability to call me Dad once more. Until then, I stayed watchful, kind, and uncompromising. In the morning light crept through the lesson Mom had taught me about loyalty, respect, and the cost of a seat left empty. As I lay awake thinking about the changes that had taken root in our lives, through the curtains of our bedroom and the gentle honey beams, I listened to Amani's steady beat of comfort, which I had earned long ago, while she slept. Across the only sound coming from Haley's side of the house was the faint buzz of her alarm, which indicated that she was awake and facing her today. Was the last day of our voyage together as father and daughter, or more precisely as between. I got up and brushed my hand over the frayed collar of my old leather jacket, which had once been a mute observer of football matches, birthdays, and late-night conversations. Now it held the weight of lessons learnt and redefining boundaries. In the kitchen, I discovered Sierra drinking coffee with her eyes averted, yet resolute. Hai backs off while the calendar behind her hangs in immaculate handwriting. scribbled in black ink and then erased and rewritten, over the course of several days until the date had become too significant. We traded a look that conveyed a lot of regret for the suffering, but also satisfaction that honesty had brought us to this point. As I made breakfast, she came out of her room with a hesitant stance, wearing jeans and a basic sweater, and her hair was loose. Instead of pulling back in protest, she placed it around her shoulders when she noticed the bread and eggs spread. Out on the table, she hesitated, her eyes landing on the vacant chair next to mine. I silently invited her in my eyes, making... She sat down, not leaning in too much, but with a breath that weighed months. Nibbling at the edge of morning, I answered in a firm voice, examining her plate as though to see if the scene was genuine, or a trick, and saying, I was here, ready but waiting. She nodded, and a brief period of delicate silence blossomed between us. She raised her head, and I met hers honestly, which made my heart constrict. Thank you for allowing me to come, she said. Back, she replied quietly, her words possessing the sincerity of someone rediscovering. I slid her plate forward and offered a slice of toast. I said, You're welcome. Meaning what? I said. The door was open. My statement was straightforward, but it had the weight of I had promised a chance rather than a guarantee, and now that she was at that threshold, Haley's eyes fell down. I know I harmed you, she said, her fingertips tracing the table's wood grain. I took your love for granted, I said, continuing to crack my voice. The revelation struck me with such seriousness that I recalled my own vows made upon a different altar, vowing to respect and treasure. Now I found myself in a position of forgiveness, ready to re-establish trust piece by piece. Breakfast concluded in peaceful camaraderie. I volunteered to drive her to her first day back on campus as we left, but it wasn't hurried or strained. Sierra gave us both a hug before we got into the car, creating a flawed but hopeful triangle in the driveway. Stopped in front of the Corolla, her hand lingering over the door handle, and I resisted the want to correct her. I'll take good care of her, she stated in a firm voice as she turned to face me. It was a vow I both feared and fearful because it meant she had a choice, cherished because she made the decision to take charge of entitlement. The drive was full of hesitant chatter, updates on mutual friends, and recollections of beach days, and thoughts on errors committed and knowledge gained. I was astounded by how our connection had changed from father and daughter by court order to stepfather and stepdaughter who had been at odds to possibly something more genuine kinship. The road in front of us wound among autumn-painted trees. Gold, and I came to see that fatherhood was a journey rather than a destination, characterized by accountability, presence, and the determination to persevere despite the most severe injuries. When we arrived at campus, Hai picked up her books and faced me. For a moment, I was afraid that history would, the rejection and the change in allegiance were repeated. But she stretched out instead. She offered a $50 and pressed a folded note into my palm, saying, "Read this later." I carefully took the gift of her vulnerability as she smiled and went steadily towards the dorms. I sat at my desk at home and opened my eyes, carrying the lessons of our history into the potential of her future. Haley's note. She expressed her appreciation for a second chance and acknowledged my devotion, and a will to merit the status I formerly held. Tears clouded my eyes as I put the folded note in my pocket, as a physical reminder that relationships are formed when both parties pledge to. When Sierra greeted us with a smile, Amani ran in for a midday lunch, and her chatter filled the place with laughter. Arrange a family game night. Our home's rhythms returned, enhanced by a more profound mutual understanding. That night, while we were huddled around the fireplace, I thought of the tapestry of our family's history, starting from the day I gained my seat after overcoming obstacles, to acceptance, and Sierra leaned against me, refusing to participate in this delicate reconciliation moment, and I noticed that Hai was cuddled up on the rug with Amani, creating a circle of warmth. Fatherhood then went beyond DNA. It was weaved through consistency in choosing and the bravery to give and withhold love until it was appreciated. In the firelight, I extended my hand and placed. Haley looked up, her eyes sparking with astonishment, and I felt a touch on her shoulder. Said in a whisper, "I'm proud of you." Her tiny but radiant smile was a lighthouse of what? In that kind conversation, I realized that the place at my table had not only been returned but broadened by the lessons we had learnt together. Fatherhood was now a connection she shared rather than a term I freely bestowed. Had selected someone I would respect as long as we shared the place with love, loyalty, and respect.